Okay, this time the real thing. All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Tony Yang. I'm the Assistant Vice President for Public Affairs here at Loma Linda University Health, and it is my honor, and I'm so excited to welcome you here to the 6th International Congress on Vegetarian Nutrition. Now, I'm going to give the bulk of the time to our presenters, because that's why you're here, but I wanted to just take 30 seconds to go over a couple of housekeeping items. Number one, I was reminded, and thank you very much for reminding us, please, if you have a cell phone, please remember to put it on silent or turn it off so that we don't interrupt our press conference. So please, we thank you for doing that. For our journalism friends out there who are covering the story, we have some resources available to you to help you to do that. Number one, some of you may have already been in contact with Herbert Atienza. He is our media relations specialist here at Loma Linda University Health, and you can reach him at area code 909-809-8547. And he lives to be bugged by all of you. So please bug him. He's a resource available. The number again is 909-809-8547. Also, for those of you who are joining us online, it's great to live in a world where we can do this, so welcome as well. And we have a phone number. If you'd like to dial in, we'll have a question and answer session at the end. If you'd like to dial in to ask a question, that phone number is 888-850-4523, and the passcode is 994349. The number again is 888-850-4523, and the passcode is 994349. And finally, again, for those online, actually for those who are here in person as well, if you would like to request some raw footage of this press conference, the entire thing in raw form, you will be able to download a file of that at that website, which is vegetariannutrition.org. vegetariannutrition.org. That website also has many other resources for you, so please check out that website, and then check later on today for that downloadable file so that you can use that video either for your broadcast or for online as well. So with that, finally, we're getting ready to get started, and I'm honored to introduce our first speaker today, and that is Dr. Surratt. So I'd like to bring him up here, and thank you so much again.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Dr. Sam Surratt, Associate Dean for Public Health Practice and also a professor at the Department of Environmental Health and Geoinformatic Sciences at Loma Linda University School of Public Health. And I welcome those of you who are here and who took some time in this busy Monday, and those who are joining in, watching, or listening online or live. And it's a pleasure to welcome all of you to this event in which we're going to share some of the exciting and great knowledge during this 6th International Congress on Vegetarian Nutrition. Loma Linda University Health is very proud to host this important conference where we're welcoming over 700 academics, researchers, dietitians, and other professionals who devote their lives to advancing research about the benefits of plant-based diets. We are very excited today to be able to release the results from a landmark worldwide nutrition clinical trial. After we hear from the researchers on their presentation, we'll have plenty of time for all of you for questions. Thank you and welcome again. And now I'm introducing Dr. Joan Sabaté, who is the president of the Congress.
Well, welcome to the 6th International Congress on Vegetarian Nutrition. That's an international gathering of researchers, practitioners on the area of plant-based diets. This is considered the premier scientific conference on plant-based diets. There are many headlines interested to journalists on this Congress. As you know, that we deal the issues of longevity, aging, obesity, and particularly what should we eat to conserve this planet. These and many other topics are available for you and we will be happy to answer any questions that you may have later on. But today we have the privilege to have this press conference to release one important study, a landmark study, that started a few years ago in Spain, and the New England Journal of Medicine has published ahead of print today, at the day that Dr. Martinez is going to present simultaneously here in the Congress. So it's my privilege to introduce one of the lead researchers on this PREDIMED study. And so, Dr. Martinez, why don't you come to the podium?
Thank you very much, John. It is a pleasure for me to be here today presenting for the first time in public the results of the PREDIMED trial. It will be a pleasure for me to answer your questions. So I will be briefly going over the main aspects of the design and results of this trial that has been just published today, online first. So this is the research team. So Professor Jordi Salas is also here to help me to answer your questions. And this is a network of researchers all over Spain with a lot of centers. This is the initial team. And the study has been funded by the official agency for funding biomedical research in Spain, which is the equivalent to the NIH. And the name is Instituto de Salud Carlos III. With these networks, I have been the coordinator of one of this network, the second that appears on the slide. So this was the main funding of the trial. In addition, we provided food at no cost to participants, to the groups of participants, depending on the allocation. So we included the help from the food industry only for providing food items. For a group, we provided for free virgin olive oil, extra virgin olive oil, and the shipment, we shipped 2.5 tons of olive oil every week to our participants. That's huge. That gives you an idea of the size of the study. And the provision of nuts, mainly walnuts from the California Walnut Commission, and also almonds and hazelnuts from Borges, another Spanish company, La Morella. And this is the design of the trial. We included men and women from 55 to 80 for men and 60 to 80 for women who were at high cardiovascular risk, a high risk of cardiovascular disease, but with no previous cardiovascular events. And they were at high risk because either they have type 2 diabetes or they have 3 or more major cardiovascular risk factors. Among the following 6 cardiovascular risk factors, there is the classical risk factors: smoking, hypertension, high levels of LDL cholesterol, low levels of HDL cholesterol, overweight or obesity, or family history of premature coronary heart disease. And they were randomly allocated to 3 equally sized groups: a group with education on Mediterranean diet plus free provision of virgin olive oil, the second group with the same education on Mediterranean diet plus free provision of mixed tree nuts, and the third group was allocated to the conventional cardiovascular prevention diet at that time, 2003. That was mainly, we can call it a low-fat diet, but we prefer to refer to this group as the control group. So this is the timeline for the recruitment of participants. This is the percentage of participants recruited every year, and to the right column, the cumulative percentage of recruited participants. You can see that at 2005, we recruited more than half of the sample. So the follow-up continued thereafter. And we had this help, very important help, that we deeply appreciate from our external advisor in the Data Safety and Monitoring Board, Professor Pisunier, who chaired this committee, from Columbia University, Professor Hu from Harvard, Professor Sabaté from Loma Linda, and Dr. Carlos González, who is the principal investigator of a large cohort study in Spain, the EPIC Spain cohort. And these are the characteristics of the participants. You see here the number of participants included in every arm of the trial. They were, at the beginning of the trial, age 67. A little bit more than half of the participants were women. Half of them were diabetics, type 2 diabetics, and more than 80% of them have hypertension. The proportion of current smoking was about 15%. Most of them had high cholesterol levels. Most of them were overweight or obese. The average BMI was 30, and also with abdominal obesity. That were the characteristics of the participants. Well, the important thing here is that the three groups were completely comparable, completely balanced with respect to major cardiovascular risk factors. So all the differences that we are going to see now regarding cardiovascular events can be causally attributed to the dietary intervention, because this was the single difference between the three groups. And this is the power of a randomized trial. Especially for primary prevention, this is unique. This is the importance of this study. Well, the primary endpoint was the rate of major cardiovascular events, either cardiovascular death or myocardial infarction or stroke. And the intervention consisted in changing the overall food pattern. In the two active Mediterranean diet groups, we leave total fat at libitum, and we introduced a diet that was typical Mediterranean and classical diet with high in monounsaturated fat coming from virgin olive oil, fish, fruits, vegetables, legumes, but low in meats and dairy. A goal for all participants was to have at least one day a week without any meat or meat product. Alcohol was permitted mainly in the form of red wine consumed with meals. And in the low-fat diet, the control group, we reduced every type of fat, and we increased, and therefore, consequently, the carbohydrate content. There was no energy restriction in any group, and no specific recommendation on physical activity. So the main issue was the overall food pattern, and I insist that we provided extra virgin olive oil, because it is not only monounsaturated fat, but the minor components like tocopherols, polyphenols, flavonoids, phytosterols are very importantly related to anti-inflammatory and antioxidant properties and other bioactive functions. And what is the Mediterranean diet? We use a very interesting tool that is this 14 points score to assess the adherence to the Mediterranean diet. And this was very useful for intervention because you can provide immediate feedback to the participants. So the dietitian can negotiate how to obtain 1 point more in the next 3 months. So this was little by little upgrading the adherence to the Mediterranean diet. And so you see in red font the bad guys, in in white font the good guys. So you have to increase the consumption of olive oil, vegetable, fruits, wine, legumes, fish and seafood, nuts, poultry instead of red meats, and sofrito. Sofrito is a special sauce made with tomato, onion, sometimes garlic, and slowly simmer in virgin olive oil that is used as a garnish for some dishes in the typical Mediterranean cuisine. We have included this more or less with the same 14 points in the main paper, but everything is further detailed in the supplementary appendix of the publication that appears today. This is the 14-point questionnaire that we used to educate participants, and this was important. So this 40-point score has been related to a lower risk of abdominal obesity in our cohort in a recent publication. And monotonically, it's very nice to see that there is an inverse association with abdominal obesity. And we use all these means. I am not going to go further because I assume that you have read the paper. So you can find there all these elements of the intervention. We have individual personalized advice every 3 months and group session with less than 20 participants every 3 months during all this period. And we provide for free 1 liter a week of olive oil to participants in the first group, and 30 grams per day, 15 grams of walnuts, and 7.5 of hazelnuts and almonds. So double the walnuts, because there is much more information about the healthy benefits of walnuts. And this is the result of increased adherence. We maintain a significant difference throughout all the duration of the trial. These are the two Mediterranean diet groups, and these are the control group. And you can see that there was a difference of about 2 points in adherence, in average adherence, along all the trial. At the beginning, they were comparable. There were no statistically significant differences between both groups at the beginning, but during the follow-up, there were. And this is a very important slide for me, because you can see here all the 14 elements of our intervention. And in 12 out of the 14, we found at 3 years statistically significant differences with a higher adherence to each of the 12 points in the 2 Mediterranean diet groups compared with the control group. So we changed the overall food pattern. But the changes in energy, nutrient, and supplemental food intake, in spite that they were also statistically significant, they were minor in magnitude. You can see here that we increased the consumption of fat, and we reduced the consumption of carbohydrates in the 2 active Mediterranean diet groups. But the changes were not very large. And we also assessed the compliance with the 2 Mediterranean diet using biomarkers in random samples of participants. So we use urinary hydrothyroxole, which is a sensitive marker of consumption of extra virgin olive oil. And we found statistically significant differences in this objective biomarker of compliance. And the same can be said about alpha-linolenic acid in plasma, which is a sensitive biomarker of a reliable biomarker of consumption of walnuts. So we found also a significant difference in the expected duration. Well, the retention was high. Most of participants were followed up successfully after an average time of almost 5 years. And the losses to follow up were greater in the control group. You see here, 11% losses to follow up. We mean, when we say losses to follow up, that we do not have contact with the participant for the last 2 years. And this is the primary endpoint. This is the rate. You see here that this is per 1,000 person years follow-up. We saw in the 2 Mediterranean diet groups a significant reduction in the risk of major cardiovascular events. And you see that the rate, the absolute rate, is higher in the control group than in the 2 Mediterranean diet groups. And when we compare then using multivariate analysis, we found these hazard ratios. There is the relative risk with these confidence intervals that we found for the 2 groups, almost exactly the same protection. This is a 30% relative reduction in the risk of major cardiovascular events. You need to take into account that cardiovascular events are the main cause of death in the world, and we are obtaining a 30% reduction in the risk just with a dietary intervention. This is the important message of our study. And the 3 groups were equal in everything else. That's the important take-home message. And we see here the survival curves, the incidence curves, and you see that the 2 Mediterranean diet done almost the same, did almost the same regarding the incidence of major cardiovascular events with these hazard ratios. These hazard ratios have not been adjusted for other risk factors and in the previous slide. And across subgroups of sex, age, and diabetes, the results were fairly consistent. And for secondary endpoints, when we speak of secondary endpoints, we're separating every single component of the combined cardiovascular endpoint. And so we found only for stroke a significant inverse association. The confidence intervals were wider when we have only a lower number of events. And for total mortality, there was a reduction in the risk, but it wasn't statistically significant. We didn't find evidence to support an inverse association, although the point estimates were lower for the 2 Mediterranean diet groups. Okay, that's it. So I will be pleased to thanks for your attention. I will be pleased to answer your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Martinez. So let me just remind you about the web address where you can find information, vegetariannutrition.org. And now we're going to have, according to the program, brief comments by our panelists. And immediately after that, we'll open the round of questions. But we have now time. If you want to make any specific comment, maybe delve in a little more in your presentation, and you, Dr. Sabate, on the conference or any other issues, like maybe a minute and a half, 2 minutes most, so that we can open it up for questions.
Okay. I will be very happy to comment on the study, since I was for 7 years a member of the Data Management and Safety Board, so I've been closely attached to the data. One comment is that a year and a half ago, we stopped the trial for ethical reasons. It was so evident that the 2 intervention groups had such a dramatic difference in cardiovascular disease that we didn't want the control group to stop from enjoying, the benefits of the other things. This is an unusual thing that we have to take the decision. And I'm glad that they follow our advice and the study is now published. In summary, this study to me says 2 things. That those that follow already a healthy diet, such as Mediterraneans, if they improve the diet a little bit, just 1 point more, and make sure that take 1 of 2 foods, either extra virgin olive oil or nuts, and particularly in the Mediterranean diet context, walnuts, because they complement very nicely with the olive oil, they experience a 30% reduction on risk in just 5 years. This is a powerful message that says that, there are tools in lifestyle change and in the dietary spectrum to really decrease the risk of cardiovascular disease. The second point I want to make is that, at least to me, this is all news. 20 years ago, here in this university, Loma Linda University, just a week from today will be 20 years to the day, we hold a press conference for the first time ever, showing that walnuts lower blood lipids. So I'm very happy that my countrymen, Spaniards, they just closed the loop. From epidemiological studies that started at Loma Linda, to testing particular risk factors for cardiovascular disease with particular nuts that we have been doing for the last 20 years, to then do multiple studies and finally a randomized clinical trial. This is the most clear evidence in scientific circles, to show the connection between nuts and cardiovascular disease. And since I'm also Spaniard and I do love olive oil, I'm also happy that this study had another arm that was extra virgin olive oil. And that is very clear. Many people eat in Spain olive oil, but it's refined olive oil. So extra virgin not only carries the fat, but also carry the polyphenols and all the micronutrients and substances that are very essential. So this study shows another thing, that it's healthy to have a diet high in fat when this fat comes from unrefined plant sources. For many years, we had the wrong message. Fat is wrong for you, and still many people believe so. Definitely fat is wrong for you if it's saturated fat. It is animal fat. But when the fat is unsaturated and comes from plant sources and unrefined, we have here a clear example that, that is quite beneficial for you.
Thank you. Dr. Martinez, you want to make an additional comment?
Well, I just wanted to say that it's 20 years since your study was presented here. So for me, it's a great happiness to be here to closing the loop, as you have said.
By the way, we also have here, let me introduce them to you in case you want to pose questions to them as well. We have Dr. Jordi Sales from Universitat Rovira i Virgili in Catalonia, Spain, and also Dr. Jacobs from University of Minnesota, and our own Dr. Patricia Pennycook, the Dean of the School of Public Health. So now let's open it up for questions from all of you. Go ahead, please.
I have a question, and you've already addressed this, and maybe you can talk about it some more, but in looking at the Mediterranean diet, it talks about fresh fruits, vegetables, seafood, and a lot of these things make sense, but it seems like over the past 15 minutes, you've really stressed the need for extra virgin olive oil and then nuts, particularly walnuts. Why are those two things? What's so special about those two things, and why those two things are you so particular on?
Yes. Well, I want to stress that our aim was to modify the whole dietary pattern, but we selected the intervention with the free provision of virgin olive oil because of a large body of research previous to our study supporting that there was a causal relationship between a high consumption of virgin olive oil in the Mediterranean countries and lower rates of cardiovascular disease. So also olive oil accounts for almost 20% of total calories in many Mediterranean people. So it is a very important issue, the replacement of this with this replacement by this healthy fat of other fats. So it made sense to introduce the virgin olive oil as a key element to help participants to modify their overall dietary pattern. And what about walnuts? There was a good evidence, observational evidence, of a reduction in the risk associated with nuts, especially with walnuts, a reduction in cardiovascular risk. So we selected these two food items to give them for free. And we obtained the best evidence for these two particular food items. But now in nutrition, and Professor David Jacobs can support this better than me, because now in nutrition we think that the realistic approach is to look at the dietary pattern, because it will be overly optimistic to think that with a single food you can obtain very large reduction in risk. So, but what we observed in the trial was that the greater changes in consumption during the follow-up period were in these two food items. So we're using both approaches, the overall dietary pattern as the main aim, but we obtain good evidence, very good evidence for these two particular food items.
So for someone who's watching this and for whatever reason isn't really sold on the whole Mediterranean diet, even though you guys say that that's the right thing to do, well, if they're to take from this, well, gosh, if I start cooking with extra virgin olive oil instead of some of these other things and start having more walnuts, are they going to see much of a difference at all?
No, you need to take the message of the whole dietary pattern. If you drink a lot of sweetened beverages, you eat a lot of meat, and you put olive oil upon the meat and burgers and sausages, and you eat no vegetables, no fish, no fruits, and you put walnuts on the sweet desserts and so on, you have to change the overall dietary pattern. That there is an important message. But for these two particular foods, we obtain a very, very good evidence with no previous such a big support for the protective role of a food item, particularly for virgin olive oil and nuts.
Dr. Sabate?
I think I agree with what it has been said. The message of this study is not that you have to put olive oil on top of what you are eating, or you have to put walnuts on top of the ice cream. So if you have 2 scoops of ice cream, take just one and then walnuts. You have to be in an isocaloric situation. What this study has shown is that instead of using refined olive oil, you use extra virgin olive oil. And you, instead of forgetting to have your fruits and your vegetables and all these things that are part of the traditional diet, you make an effort to increase 1 or 2 points. I mean, it's not a dramatic thing from 0 to 14. So basically, most of the subjects just increase by 2 points compared with the control group. 2 points means one is already either olive oil or nuts. So basically, in practical terms, the two groups just improve in 1 extra point on the average. So if you do one effort in changing your diet and you replace bad fats for good fats, you get these results. And I think this applies to any other food pattern. If you are on animal fat and you replace with olive oil, or you are in animal fat, whatever is the source, and you replace that with nuts, I mean, you may accomplish quite a lot of benefit.
Go ahead.
This is a vegetarian nutrition conference, and the press release today announcing the study says plant-based diets can reduce cardiovascular disease risk, and yet the people in your study were eating meat, fish and dairy. So can you clarify what role these non-plant-based items actually play in this diet?
Okay, as a chair of the Congress, I can answer this question. Plant-based diet is a generic name to any diet that predominantly comes from plant foods, although it does not exclude some foods of animal origin. There are several plant-based diet patterns. One is the lacto-ovo-vegetarian, in which animal products such as dairy and eggs are included. Another plant-based diet is a Mediterranean diet that is very low in red meat, also includes cheese and fish. And there is Asian diet that has some fish that is also considered plant-based diet. So any, I would say, traditional diet in which animal products were used as a garnish or as a condiment or as a supplement, as opposed to being at the center of the plate, could be considered a plant-based diet. So one thing is to be vegetarian, that excludes all flesh foods, and plant-based is a diet that includes small portions of that. In the Mediterranean, a traditional Mediterranean diet is a plant-based diet in the sense that it has very low animal products and abundance of plant foods.
Can you give us a sense, though, in this study of how much meat and dairy the subjects in the two groups were actually eating?
How much meat was consumed in this study, and if they decreased the amount of meat or not, the control versus
and dairy.
And
meat
dairy.
And dairy.
The consumption of dairy did not change. Almost there were no important changes during the study, and the consumption of meat was reduced in the 3 groups because the low-fat diet group was also advised to reduce the consumption of meat, but in small amounts. And the consumption of meat was reduced to, I don't remember exactly now, I can look at the data, but you can get them in the supplement. And after 3 years follow-up, the percentage of people saying that they consume red meats less than 1 per day was after 3 years was 93% in the control group, 95% in the walnuts and hazelnuts and almond group, and 97% in the virgin olive oil. So they have at least 1 or 2 days a week without any meat. Most of participants, 97-95% in the 2 intervention groups.
Other questions?
I don't know if I misunderstood, but I think you said that during the time of the study, you changed something.
Yes.
And you said that, if I understood it right, that you increased the amount of fat and reduced the amount of carbohydrates.
No, that was the goal of the study. The goal of the study was to increase in the two Mediterranean diet groups the consumption of fat, because we provided then with walnuts, hazelnuts, and almonds to one group, and another with extra virgin olive oil. So the fat consumption, the fat intake goes up. So, and in the other...
In the form of olive oil.
In the form of olive oil or nuts. And that is what we intended to do, and this is what happened at the end of the trial.
The reduction of carbohydrates was what form of carbohydrates?
Yes, mainly white bread was the main staple. It is the main staple in Spain, so they reduced a little bit the consumption of white bread. Because it is a good source of energy for the Spanish population. And we also, I take advantage of this question, we also did an amendment of the protocol in 2006. Because at the beginning, to the control group, we just gave them a leaflet, a brochure, explaining the low-fat diet, and with no special intensive intervention. After October 2006, we started to do exactly the same protocol in the control group to push them to follow and to comply with the low-fat diet. But this was a very hard work. It was very difficult to get them lower the fat intake, their fat intake. So our study is not exactly comparing a perfect low-fat diet versus a Mediterranean diet. There is the advice, the recommendation, intense and during a long time, to reduce the total amount of fat in the diet, but with limited success, because it is very difficult for Mediterranean people to comply with this message. But the good thing in the study is that after we did that, after October 2006, the reduction in risk was stronger. That means that when we got participants in the control group to reduce their intake of fat, they were not better because the contrast was higher in favor of the Mediterranean diet. You know what I mean? That is an important message also.
Go ahead, please.
In the low-fat diet, the fats that they were eating, were those the refined or the animal sources? Were those less healthy fats?
Yes, you raise a very important point. The important point is not the nutrient, the amount of fat, but the quality of fat. So in the control group, we advised them to avoid any type of fat. That was the prevalent message when we started the trial. If you look at what was in the American Heart Association webpage at that time, even it was written in Spanish, and we adopted that message. They say to reduce all kind of fats. Later on, the American Heart Association introduced the advice to consume fatty fish as a protective against cardiovascular disease. But we started with this message to reduce every kind of fat.
And is that surprising to you that a low-fat diet would be less successful than the Mediterranean diets with the healthy fats?
Well,
it's contrary to kind of the general message that people get.
Yes. But you know, there was a very large trial here in the United States, the Women's Health Initiative Dietary Modification Trial. It was published in JAMA in 2006 with almost 50,000 postmenopausal women, and they found nothing with a low-fat diet after 8 years, nothing regarding cardiovascular prevention. So the low-fat diet has not been very successful. And they got a substantial reduction, not as large as they intended, but they definitively reduced the fat intake in the intervention group. And also, in the Look Ahead trial, this is another context, because the Look Ahead was only for diabetics, and the goal was to lose weight, to make people lose weight, and to reduce heart clinical events of cardiovascular disease and mortality. And they stopped the trial last October after almost 10 years, I think, of follow-up because of lack of evidence of benefit. And they were using a low-fat diet. So the low-fat diet has been successful in smaller trials in the short term, but in the long term, we do not have very good evidence to support this reduction in any kind of fat.
Yes, with respect to the low-fat diet, this was a message of a few decades for the dietary guidelines. And basically, the reason for low-fat diet was either a purposely or just innocent confusion that the American diet and many other Western diets were high in fat. And the message was to reduce fat without discriminating among fats. Probably they use the nutrient low-fat diets as opposed to, say, the food, reduce the amount of meat and other animal products. Nowadays, there are several studies, and the situation in the scientific community is changing, and it's recognizing two things. One, indeed, a low-fat diet, not too low, but low-fat diet is indeed healthy. But it's equally healthy, or maybe a little bit more, and the trial still is out, a diet that is high in fat, provided, as I said earlier, that the fat comes from unrefined plant sources. So if the fat comes from plant sources and is unrefined, such as extra virgin olive oil that is just cold pressed, I mean, there is only physical pressure and nothing else, or such as the ones in nuts, as nature created them, is not refined, and besides the fat, it breaks many other nutrients and components. I think this study, is the most clear evidence that the difference in fat in two diets when the source is unrefined plant sources is good. Besides, plant sources are where we have essential fatty acids. There are some fats that are essential for your health, and these are alpha-linolenic acid and linolenic acid. Walnuts is one of the richest sources of these two essential fatty acids. Other nuts have only one of them, that is linolenic. Olive oil is also a rich source of fat and has many other minor substances that are also healthy.
Please go ahead.
Were all groups eating similar amounts of fish, and could differences in the fish intakes between the groups have had any bearing on the results?
Okay. The differences, the changes in fish consumption during the trial were small. Indeed, they were better in the two Mediterranean diet groups. The increase was tiny, only 0.3 servings per week. 0.3 servings per week on average in the Mediterranean diet group compared with the control group. So this is a small difference. It was statistically significant, but it was small, the difference.
Can I also ask about the calorie intakes of the control group versus the intervention groups? Was there much difference? And also at the end, were the BMIs of the groups different? And could that have contributed to the benefits you saw?
Yes. Well, I can answer your question about calories. I cannot answer your question about BMI because we are currently analyzing this data to present a paper on changes on BMI and weight gain, so I cannot say anything about BMI. So about calories, at the end of the trial, the total calorie consumption in the Mediterranean diet plus extra virgin olive oil was 2,172 calories. In the second group, it was 2,229, and in the control diet, it was 1,960. So the calorie intake was lower in the control group at the end of the trial compared with the two Mediterranean diet.
Dr.
Can I make
Jacobs?
a short statement?
Yes.
Should I come up?
Yes, please.
Hi, I'm David Jacobs, and I'm a honored to have the title of Mayo Professor of Public Health at the University of Minnesota. And I have nothing to do with this study except that I've known about it for a number of years and have been complimentary every time I heard about the design. What I wanted to comment on was the importance of this study for regulators and for the Dietary Guidelines Commission. The field of nutrition compared to the field of drug research is characterized by B-level evidence. The A-level evidence is randomized clinical trials. You take a statin, you take a placebo, everything is completely masked. Nobody knows what anybody's doing except that at the end you mathematically conclude that the statin works better. We haven't been able to do that very much in the long run with clinical outcomes in nutrition. This study really did two things. It compared the two foods to a group that didn't get the two foods, and it gave advice. The advice was not very powerful if you look carefully at the tables of the changes. In my experience, people don't take advice very well. They take food that you give them, but advice is hard to take. And so I think that most of this study, and it remains to be seen with further analyses of the predictability of the other changes for the outcomes, most of this has to do with nuts, with the particular mixture, walnuts half and almonds and hazelnuts the rest, and with extra virgin olive oil, which was really, in the Spanish context, compared to refined olive oil, because most people use olive oil in Spain. And what this study gives us is A-level evidence. And the Dietary Guidelines Commission will notice that, and the regulators will have something to say about that. And I think it also sets a tone for nutrition research, that you can actually study what we eat in its natural form and come out at the end with reduced disease.
Thank you, Dr. Jacobs. I really appreciate that, because I was thinking along those lines in terms of the public health significance of the study we've been talking about, individual health, and that's a very, very important point. And actually, allow me to raise a question, kind of following up. What comes next, and how feasible will it be to extend the knowledge that we're learning from the study in different cultures where there's different tastes and different culinary attitudes and uses? The message is clear, but can you comment a little bit on that? How would you send this message to other countries that do not use a Mediterranean diet?
Yes, I think that the generalizability of this message to other cultures is needed. Is something that, because cardiovascular disease represents a very high proportion in the burden of disease nowadays in many countries, also in emerging countries, in developing countries. And the comparison group here was following a healthy diet, because at baseline they in fact follow the traditional Mediterranean diet, the control group. And in addition, they receive advice to follow a healthy dietary pattern. So in spite of that, we found a contrast. So the contrast, the risk reduction will be even greater if we compare this approach, this Mediterranean diet intervention, versus a typical Western diet. So the potential for generalizability and for benefits for health for other culture is impressive, as I see it. And what is coming next? We are planning, and we plan to start very soon, the Predimed 2 trial, because we have demonstrated with this study that the Mediterranean diet is better than a control group. So we will use a next step, that is to compare Mediterranean diet. We did nothing here about physical activity, weight loss, and calorie restriction. So for people who are overweight or obese, we can compare the typical Mediterranean diet as the control group, and now another active intervention group adding Mediterranean diet plus physical activity plus energy restriction, but goals for weight management and also behavioral treatment of overweight obesity. That is what we plan to do in the next years. The same team, we are a very happy team, especially today. We have a very good atmosphere during these 10 years working, and we are prepared to accomplish a new large trial with more than 6,000 people, just 2 groups now, Mediterranean diet with no calorie restriction, just as the Predimed one, and then the other group with the active intervention on weight management and physical activity.
Thank you. Dr. Sabate?
Well, to answer your question, I think there is 2 layers. One is what is next as far as generalizability of the results and also as far as doing further research. I think the results are very generable to a middle upper class society in many countries of the world. The Mediterranean diet food pattern has already been sold as a healthy pattern, and some that have already the palate, I mean for olive oil and for nuts, and also they have the budget to incorporate these. They don't have to be in Spain, they can be in the United States, or they can be in Canada, or they can be in many other countries. The message, one of the messages of this trial is that unrefined plant fats are good. And I think researchers from other countries and in other cultures, for maybe the palate of olive oil is not ready, or maybe they don't have the budget to have nuts, they have to see in their respective cultures and their respective traditional diets what are the plant sources of fat to be incorporated to replace animal sources. So there is a task for researchers in many other countries to try to emulate this with whatever is culturally appropriate. That's the thing.
Thank you.
I would like to make a comment, not on that, but okay.
Okay, no, go ahead, and then we'll take the question here from the...
No,
okay, then go ahead, please.
Just brief, and well, first of all, happy anniversary. I'm just thrilled and delighted about the 20-year, the convergence of these 2 very quintessential events, and the 700 plus of us celebrating with you about that first paper, and all the study participants whose lives and their families' lives who changed through this intervention, which I think is that big story about public health. You've impacted through an intervention the lives of real people, which I think is incredible. My 2 questions really. In the displacements of calories, or whether we talk calories or foods, primarily we saw the increase in fat and the decrease in carbohydrate. Were the displacement foods specific, mostly bread? I mean, just to reiterate, was it mostly the bread exchange, or did you see other things, or were there different foods that kind of came in or snuck out that the replacement happened around? That was the first. And then, were there any differences seen in the 2 Mediterranean groups, trend or significance between the olive oil and the nut groups that have been teased out of relevance that you're sharing yet or now?
Well, in addition to white bread, I would say some cakes, cookies, and sweet desserts were replaced by fruit and in smaller amounts of these cookies and cakes and so on. So this was an element of the intervention in the 14-point tool. And with respect to the comparison between the 2 groups, if I haven't understood well your question, between the 2 active groups, the study was not powered enough to do this comparison. And we preclude any comparison between the 2 groups. Also, from the point of view of statistical power, because we need to limit by design the number of potential comparisons. So we did just 2 comparisons, every intervention group versus a single control group. And that is what the statistical planning of the study decided. So we would have needed a very large sample to do these comparisons. Almost more than 10,000 people instead of 7,500.
Dr. Salas, please.
I would like to add something in relation to this, especially in order to explain what are the mechanisms probably explaining this reduction that we have observed in relation to cardiovascular disease. Using the data of the PREDIMET study, we have published several studies that we have demonstrated in 2006 that people in the pilot study, in the first individuals that have randomized into the trial, we have observed that a better lipid profile after in the two groups of Mediterranean diet after consuming nuts or virgin olive oil. Also, in the first 1,000 people, 1,400 people randomized to the PREDIMET trial, we have observed after 1 year of randomization that individuals that have metabolic syndrome at baseline of the trial, we have observed a regression of the metabolic syndrome in both groups, both Mediterranean diet groups. And also we have published 2 years ago the effect of the Mediterranean diet on the prevention of diabetes. And we have also observed that both Mediterranean diet groups, in both Mediterranean diet groups, we have observed a decrease in the incidence of new cases of diabetes. So we have observed by several mechanisms we can explain this reduction in cardiovascular disease. Thank you.
I think there was a comment hanging from Dr. Sabate.
Well, time is running out, and I think I would like to make my last comment,
okay,
if it's possible.
Yes, go ahead.
As chair of the 6th International Congress on Vegetarian Nutrition, I'm very pleased that my colleagues from Spain have chosen this venue to publicly present for the first time the results of the PREDIMET. This is the first time in a scientific conference that this is presented, and they have chosen Loma Linda University, where the story of nuts started, to do so. So I'm very pleased, and thank you for that. I'm very pleased that New England has accepted to publish ahead of print, 6 weeks ahead, just for the occasion. So in a couple of hours, Dr. Martinez will do the plenary session and will present these results. And to answer or put together with your question as far as the vegetarian diets, he's going to do two things. Present the results that you have been already witness now, but also he has developed a pro-vegetarian score with these subjects that they have a diet that includes dairy products and meat. And the results are very clear as far as total mortality. Those that follow the score, as far as pro-vegetarian, have 30% lower mortality on these same subjects that score very low on that. That means the opposite of having plants. So if you can stay for a couple of hours, you will see also that in this population, Mediterranean, when you have a pro-vegetarian score, results are duplicated as it has been in many other countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think with this, we'll close our press conference. Let me remind you again about our Congress focusing on plant-based diets. There's very interesting topics that are being presented and addressed, longevity and diet, weight reduction and diet, one that is close to my heart, how your diet can hurt or benefit the health of the planet, and many other exciting topics. Thank you all for coming. Thank you very much.